How's it going, YouTube? Coming in today with another video, and today, guys, the video is going to be where to hand trap. Now, this is going to be really in-depth, and it's going to be very reminiscent of my last hand trap video, but I want to go a lot deeper into the meta because there's a lot of moments where you have to be really careful about where you hand trap because of things like talent and really knowing your timing and what the matchups are going to be like, the lines that they go for. So I really do hope that you use today as a resource moving forward, because I'm going to be going over all my experiences playing against the current meta and really try to explain why I think that hand traps in certain areas are really important and where you might want to rely more on like board breakers. If you haven't already checked out my sponsors over on Imperium Duelist, Dragonshield, Gem, Cloud, RW, Grimoire, definitely go ahead and do so, all down below in the description. If you haven't already started using my TCGPlayer link when you're starting to buy cards on TCGPlayer, definitely go ahead and do so down below in the description. It's just a link, you click on it, that's when you buy your cards, and it just supports the channel directly. It costs nothing to you. Also, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. If you want more educational videos, if you want more live gameplay and more breakdowns of gameplay, subscribe, and we'll only grow as a larger and larger community. I appreciate each and every one of you. I thank you so much for the wonderful year. It's been an absolute pleasure. Now that I have all of the submissions from the card drive in, I have so many different decks to create and then hand out. I'm very excited to help more players be able to play this wonderful game and experience the things that we do. So definitely give yourselves all a pat on the back for that. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being a part of my community. And let's hop right into where to hand trap. Triple Tactics Talent is a mainstay 3 of in everyone's main deck for the most part right now. Some people are coping and they're only playing like 2, but you just have to play 3 talent right now. This card is just so good. Interactions where Lacrima bring back Requiem and then Requiem effect send the Paradise off of the Lacrima that the Requiem summon is way too popular right now because Fiendsmith is like 95% of the meta. So that alone should be a W reason to play talent, right? Because at that point they're trying to get that interruption off, and Requiem's only during the main phase. So they're pretty forced to be able to use the Requiem in that regard. So that means talent is going to be alive a lot more often. It's really easy to be able to bait interruption and be able to bait interaction for things like talent. So this is where if you are playing Fualos, you have to shotgun this card in the draw phase. It's really important because another mainstay 3 of is Nib right now. You have to play 3 Nib. That card's way too good. And if you're going to be dropping Nib later on in the turn, it's better to just have a couple draws off Fua, because at that point, if you are going to Nib and they do talent look at your hand, let's say you drew 2 cards before you're able to Nib, then you're going to get talent ripped, and then you're back to 5, you draw to 6, it's like nothing ever happened. Yeah, they have hand knowledge, you get an additional card, but if you're playing a deck like Ryzeal Fiendsmith or like one of the better decks, then you already have so many different pushes through a board that it shouldn't matter that much. And that's one thing that I do think is really important as well. So just make sure that you are shotgunning Fulos. I think this is just the best option right now, because again, you want to play around talent as much as possible. Now, I have been getting a lot of questions about Mermail. Again, I don't think this deck is good at all. It's very fake good. I think this deck's very bad. There's a couple ways that you can interact with this. They are getting some actual nice support, which I can respect once they get the new support. But as of right now, Drool is really strong. I do like this against the deck. There's a couple interaction points that you really need to know, though. So Prince is usually going to go Prince dump Bodyguard, add Dragoon. Bodyguard is going to go ahead and summon out something like Pike. So you want to Ash Bodyguard because it's going to be the best bet that you have. If you do have a DD Crow, though, that also works here because they go Prince dump Bodyguard for cost. So if you chain the DD Crow banish Bodyguard off of the Prince, the Bodyguard won't resolve because it's in a new location, which is also really fire. I do like DD Crow a lot right now. It's another card that you could play if you want to. Just, again, being able to out things like Paradise really easily. The other thing is that the Pike is going to allow your opponent to get to the Abyss Shrine, so that's another point where you really want to cut that off, because even if they're pitching a Dragoon, they're not really able to do that much more. So if you have the Mourner onto the Pike after it's summoned off the Bodyguard, or if you want to Veiler or Imperm this, both are very strong options. Again, Droll and Lockbird just being such a powerful card in this matchup. And then also having cards like Bell and the Ogre for the Anemone, just not letting your opponent be able to get back to their combo lines. A lot of the Mermail list have cut Swap Frog, which is cutting down on like the freezing chains. Revive off of the ice barrier to make a quick toad. A lot of times they're going for just like a rank 4. Then they're going for like the Coelacanth. So there's a couple things that you really got to consider with this. But I do think stopping the combo as early as possible via the Bodyguard or shutting off the Pike Search for the Abyss Shrine is going to be really important. If you have like really lackluster sides against this deck and you're already playing the Lancia, you could just opt to put it in if you want to, just because the Lancia is going to turn off the Minstrel effect to go ahead and send itself in something else to banish something out of your hand temporarily, and it would turn off another search for them as well. So definitely not super optimal to have to do that, but it's not bad either. It just turns off a lot of the hand knowledge, which we don't want our opponent to have, and then another outlet for them to get a monster effect off. Now for Ryzeal Fiendsmith, this is the deck where you really want to make sure that you're being patient. This is something where I feel like a lot of people are not doing this right now, and it's costing them dearly in the matchups. You have to be patient. If you open like Nib, Abyssal, and like an Ash, and your opponent opens with the Fiendsmith combo, maybe you want to really just hold off. And that's something where if your opponent goes for like Necroquip and Engraver on the board, and then you're like, well, if I get Wave King here, I lose. When the Engraver is going to come out of the grave, you have to Bishal there to turn off the ability to go into that Caesar. But if you open like Nib Imperm, let your opponent combo. Let them go completely off. If you see them going for like a sequence line, and they're going to be something Desiree, you can hold Nib till the Duo Drive. Right, because the Duo Drive has to detach to be able to search. So when they activate the effect to search, you just nib there, and that's really strong. So definitely very powerful. The other thing though is like if your opponent opens up with like a Unicorn, you want to make sure that you have Nib just waiting as long as possible. Especially if you open like Nib Imperm and they go Unicorn to search. I usually just imperm the Unicorn because it's really solid when you're able to make sure that your opponent doesn't have the Birth, because Birth is a one of in the deck, and if they're Unicorn searching, they don't have Birth. So that's one thing where you know that the Unicorn's just not going to be back and it's not going to be a problem. The extra decks today are not made for Unicorn rips because they're so tight already that a Unicorn is really problematic. So if you can turn off the Unicorn being able to come back to the board, or if your opponent just raw activates Rate Saw, I'm probably just Ash Blossoming it, because at that point, I really don't want my extra getting ripped. Things like Requiem getting ripped is pretty detrimental. But let's talk about where to hand trap. So one of the biggest things right now is going to be Fiendsmith in Paradise, and you can Bell the Lacrima that is trying to revive the Requiem, which is really strong. You can go ahead and Bishal the Requiem when they try to revive the Requiem, which is also really strong because it makes the Lacrima go back in deck anyway, so they lose the Light Fiend Engrave. You also can just Ash the Fiendsmith in Paradise, which is strong. If you want your opponent to activate a monster effect so you can turn on something like a Thrust, you can let them go Lacrima into Requiem effect, and then Ash, and then you have a live Thrust or a Tactics, which is great. Otherwise, you can just go ahead and Ash the Paradise once it's activated. It does banish for cost, so you don't have to worry about that again, which is really nice. I really do like the idea of banishing Requiem because it does turn off a lot of the grind game, and it turns off a lot of the access back into the engine. It also turns off the Engraver Sends and the Necroquip, so getting rid of Requiem is really solid. Nibiru win? It depends. And that's one thing where, again, if your opponent summons out the Engraver and the Necroquip, if you cannot out a Caesar, you might have to drop Rock. If you have Nib Imperm, you're just waiting on Duo. So it really does vary from time to time. If your opponent is going first game one, they're just going to summon a Wave King. And if their hand's not that good, usually it's like Wave King, set 1 or 2, and pass. They could go for Desiree line, but that's really not common. It's more common game 2 or 3 to shut down the sideboarded cards. And it also helps when your opponent sides in like Ulti Slayer, and then you're not really worried because your Desiree is not targetable. But Nibiru is going to save you most times, and you really want to drop it toward the end of their combo anyway. It's either going to be on the duo drive, or if you can't out the Caesar, it's going to be on the 2 bodies hitting the board. And then again, if you cannot out a Caesar, make sure that you are going to go ahead and bell the effective engraver, Bishul the engraver, Crow the engraver. Whatever you have to do to make sure that that does not hit the board is going to be really important. Now, do you imperm the ice? I kind of like imperming ice. Usually you don't hit the level 4s, but hitting ice is really important because that's the way into the Fiendsmith engine. A lot of times people are not playing Moon, they're just going into Exciton, then going Requiem. What imperming ice does for you though is if your opponent didn't open up like Tractor and Engraver, they have to just go like summon X after that, and they don't get any of their Fiendsmith engine going, which is really strong, and you do lock your opponent into their 4s, which is great. Just try to make sure that you have an out for the duo drive as well though, like if you have double imperm or something, right? Because at that point, if your opponent goes for like game 1, their normal summon ice summon out like X search sword, and then they go for like the Exciton Requiem line into Wave King, and then they go into duo after. It's better to just imperm there. A lot of times you're not going to see a Desiree drop early. It's going to be a Wave King first. So that's where you can kind of hold the imperm and then hit the duo, as long as you can deal with the Wave King, right? So there's a lot of things you got to be thinking about at the time and thinking a turn or 2 ahead. And that's kind of like where my thought process goes too, because a lot of times, especially game 1, again, they're going to be going for a Wave King that's just more common. Doesn't mean that's always going to be the case, but it's going to be the usual case. But long story short, imperm on ice, it's not bad. It locks them into 4s because at that point, the only extension they're going to have is going to be like the other Ryzeal cards, unless they open Engraver or Track. And then any other Handtrap, Ogre, Mourner, Veiler, Imperm is going to be on duo drive. You want to make sure you shut down duo drive, but if you're either not super worried about it, or you think that you have another Handtrap that's going to deal with the duo drive, I do like Ghost Ogre onto something like Desiree. I think that it's really solid just to be able to clear the body off the board as soon as possible. The reason why I feel like a lot of people go for the Wave King instead of the Desiree is because if you go for Desiree, you don't get Fiendsmith and Paradise lines. But if you go for Wave King, then you also will have Fiendsmith and Paradise lines, because if you go for Desiree, you lose out on a lot of your light fiends, which can be really unfortunate. So keep that in the back of your mind, that when you see a Wave King, it usually signifies that there's going to be a Paradise involved as well. Now, this deck is not super popular, but I wanted to touch on it. The Tenpai Fiendsmith pile, the Trift deck, Nibiru, Droll, Bishul's all very strong against his deck. You always want to just go ahead and stop like the Lacrima trying to get back into the Requiem for the Paradise, or like Ash the Paradise. Secondary, you want to be able to stop the Tenpai card, so like Ash on Kaiman, Bell on the Biden effect, Ogre onto the summoning. But for primary engines, Ogring Desiree or just negating sequence, this deck is through and through just a pile, and it can be kind of awkward because like you have a lot of cards that work in tandem together but like don't at the same time, and you can't just outright die against this deck. So if you can deal with like a standard Fiendsmith board, just hold your hand traps to the Tenpai cards and just like Ash Kaiman, and then it's not going to be a problem, right? You could even just like hold Bell for the Biden, and at that point it's also super awkward because they don't have all the bodies they want. So definitely a couple really solid options here. It's usually very secondary to hit the Tenpai cards, but if you're okay with dealing with all of, like the Fiendsmith cards, let's say you have like Nib, you can just go ahead and just deal with everything you need to. And then if your opponent goes for like a Seal, then they go Seal Tribute at some point when you're playing. You go Bishul, banish the Seal, and then the Seal can't summon from deck because it's in a new location. So that's also really solid. Just know that whatever you hand trap, you're also going to have to deal with the Tenpai cards at some point. So just play to not die, because at that point, you're going to make sure that you're stopping the Tenpai cards, and you're going to be able to do better in your battle phase. Next up here is Memento. I really do think this deck is going to be like the 6th best deck in the room right now. But at the same time, it's really important to talk about a deck like this because you will see it. Lancia against this deck, shout out to Tyler, is really, really solid. Being able to turn down the fusion here and then also the Memento fusion effects in the graveyard is going to be really strong because A, they don't get the field spell, and B, they don't get a free search. So that's one thing where your opponent is going to be pretty far behind from that. And it makes their end board like really awkward. So Lancia, since everyone's already on it, mandatory 3 in the sideboard right now, it's a really good option in the Memento. So if you do play against this deck and you have Lancia, just board it in. It's pretty solid. You're gonna have to deal with like a couple pops and usually like a mace take, but I just bait that out with like the Fiendsmith cards, right, and then start playing Ryzeal cards. So it really depends on how you want to go about it in your deck, but that's basically what you're going to be dealing with if you drop Lancia. As far as Tattoo No-Show go, you're going to want to make sure that you Ash, Mourner, Veiler, Impermit, whatever you got to do to it to make sure this card is shut down, because this is going to be the play starter. If you cannot shut this down, you only open up like a Bishul, you're just going to go ahead and Bishul or Bell away the Gaddock. This card is going to be able to get them back to more plays, and that's something that you just want to deal with immediately. So the last thing here is going to be Ghost Ogre on the field spell. Card is a nuisance and I don't like dealing with it. That's one thing where if you just clear it right away, it solves a lot of your problems and helps you deal with a lot less. Now, last but not least here is going to be Maliss. So Maliss, Lancia, it's the best card against this deck. Lancia is crazy. Nibiru is pretty strong. A lot of times I see Maliss players just not respecting Nibiru at all. Even if they do, I feel like it's still fine because you clear things like Teraherb. If I can clear Teraherb, even via Ghost Ogre when they dump to Save Worm, that's a W for me, because that's not only a Save Worm, it's also either a Code of Soul or a Pack Bit, right? So it's just something that I don't want to deal with, and just clearing it immediately is something that is absolutely fire. But you do want to side out cards like Mourner, Veiler, Imperm. I think these cards are just absolutely terrible. I side them out for more going second cards, more board breaks, more ulti slayers, things like that. You could keep Imperm in, but side out your Mourners or your Veilers. I think Imperm's fine because a lot of times if they don't open up the GWC, the MTP, or the TB11, most of the time it's just MTP or TB11. Imperm's crazy because they'll go like set a card, normal Dormouse effect. You just hit it with Imperm, because if they open GWC, the card doesn't really work if they just started their turn, right? So they have to draw one of two cards for my Imperm to be off, and that's where I think that that's perfectly fine. So Imperm's still pretty good going second. But Veilers and Mourners can just go. They're not very good at all. Again, things like Thrust and Ulti Slayer should be in instead of those. I really do like Ash on MTP instead of Ash on the Revive of Binder. You could hit the Revive of Binder, there's no problem with that, but on your turn, they're going to be using White Rabbit to set MTP so that they have another layered interruption where they can non-targeting banish something off your board and then also get follow-up search. So that's one thing where if you just Ash the MTP on your own turn, you're playing less into talent and you're also just completely cutting them off a really important interruption. The same thing goes with Bell. You could Bell the GWC on your turn, or you could just wait for them to summon the White Binder, and then you're just like, alright, cool, I'm just going to Bell the effect of White Binder, because at that point, I don't have to worry about my cards getting banished, right? So I'd rather just save the interruption for the actual problematic effect than stopping the way to get to it in case there's a different way that they get to it, right? So, like, let's say that you Bell the effect of GWC and then they Bishul the White Binder out of their grave, summon a White Binder and banish cards. You didn't really deal with the problem, right? So when they summon it and use the effect, then you Bell it, right? Then it's just like, all right, cool, now I really don't have to worry about it. So, in my opinion, I feel like that's a lot more valuable than hitting the way to it, because if they're going to get to it anyway, I'm like, all right, cool, I can deal with the body on board, but the banish effect is annoying, so let's just wait for that. If you did learn something today, definitely let me know down below in the comment section. I read all of your comments, and I really do appreciate each and every one of you. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Follow my Twitch, Twitter, Instagram, and join my Discord. But I hope that you all have a wonderful night. I'll catch you all in the next video. Thank you.